Last week we were looking at the topic of the lake of fire, and to be honest, we got sidetracked a lot. Somebody put a comment. Somebody could put a comment below the video that it was horrible because of all the interruptions, and the person who commented was giving everybody a tongue lashing for interrupting. So I'm absolutely not going to forbid interruptions in the evening, because I really think that we should have at least one session, and we can have, some talk back and so on. So that's our Bible study session. But at the same time, what I will ask is, please keep the questions, and if there are comments, make them short. That's the other thing. The comments were too long. And if there are questions, let them be on the topic. Okay, don't drift off into all kinds of side issues. That is one of the things that is a bit disturbing. So, as I said, questions, welcome. Short comments, acceptable. But stay on the topic so we can make progress in what we are doing. All right, so let me go to the Bible, share my screen, and we are going to, of course, go to the book of Revelation. And we are in Revelation chapter 20, actually. Let me go there now. Revelation. Okay, we start from verse 1. This just to remind us of the context. We have just seen where Jesus returns. That's the end of chapter 19. And he threw the beast and the false prophet into the lake of fire. That's why we had that long discussion last week to settle on what is a lake of fire. And now immediately we come to the third person in that trinity of evil. You have three of them. You have the dragon, you have the beast, and the false prophet. You will remember that on plague number 6, it says 3 unclean spirits like frogs came out of the mouth of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. So it's Satan and his 2 disciples, if you want to put it that way. So when Jesus comes again, the 2 disciples are thrown into the lake of fire, the beast and the false prophet. And we settled last week. This means that they are totally destroyed. They're not in some place where they are perpetually burning. It's a coded phrase. It's a coded phrase. When you are dealing with a coded phrase, the phrase itself it does not necessarily have any similarity to what it represents. It's just a phrase. Like, when I was a boy, I made up a very simple code where I jumbled the letters of the alphabet, and B represented D, G represented E, and H represented A. So when I put a B on the screen, B represented I. So when I put a B on the paper, it had nothing to do with B at all. It really represented I. But if you looked at it and you didn't know the code, you saw B, and you say it's a B. There are the 2 parts that go like this, and B sounds like B. But because it's a code, it has nothing to do with the shape of B, the sound of B, or the meaning of B. You have to transliterate it. You have to translate it into the meaning of the code and understand that what you're looking at is an I, even though you are seeing a B. So that's how it is with Revelation. We see a lake of fire. It has nothing to do with a lake, and it has nothing to do with fire. It means something completely different. It means you cease to exist. So when Jesus comes, the beast organization ceases to exist. It will never come back. It's in the lake of fire, or it experiences the lake of fire. The false prophet institution also ceases to exist. What about the third member, the dragon? Well, not the dragon's turn yet. The dragon does not yet cease to exist. And the reason is because his judgment process is not yet over. So the dragon, that's where we come to chapter 20 now. It says, and I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that he must be loosed a little season. You know, last night, Sister Suzanne was making the point that, you know, somebody said to her, how do we know what is figurative and what is literal as we are studying the Bible? And I suppose in particular places like the book of Revelation, how do we know when is it figurative and when is it literal? And I admit that it's not always easy to answer that question, because sometimes you just look at something and you can't really tell, is this figurative or is this literal? But I've found out something, that in many cases you can compare one passage with another passage, and that can help you to come to a better understanding of what is figurative and what is literal. We have said many times, and I want to repeat, that Revelation was not supposed to be an easy book to understand. It was not supposed to be easy. It was not intended to be easy. God did not design it to be an easy book to understand. God deliberately made it hard to understand. Why? Because God knows that when it's hard to understand, nobody will ever understand it. So you know what? Now those who want to understand it have to come to God. They have to come to the writer. And since he's God, he can give everybody the understanding who comes to him. So it brings out the point that in understanding these prophecies, what we need is not smart. It's not how to be smart. It's not how to study in a certain manner. What we need is how to come to the Lord, how to trust the Lord. That is the criterion. That is the key. So it's seeking a relationship with Jesus. That is the greatest tool, rather than seeking the methods that people might use. So I want to emphasize that point, that, you know, Paul says that this treasure, God has put this treasure in vessels of dirt, vessels of clay. The treasure of the gospel is put in vessels of clay. Why? So that the glory and the honor may go to God. So I would like to compare that to even my own experience. Okay, I know that if I was a pastor, if I had been a conference pastor, or a theologian who studied Hebrew and Greek, and if I had gone to Loma Linda and some of these universities, and I'd sat at the feet of Greek and Hebrew scholars, and I came here opening up the scripture, then people would say, wow, this man is really learned. And when I am to give a talk, they would take a paper with all my qualifications, and they would list all the places I'd been and all the qualifications I'd obtained before I speak. And then everybody would say, oh my goodness, I need to go to Loma Linda as well. I need the qualifications of this man. But you know what God does? God takes a vessel of dirt. God takes somebody who, I mean, I'm just lucky that I squeezed in to get a certificate when I went to college, teachers college, for a couple of years. And that was almost like an accident. But I have a high school education. On my Facebook page, I think I put the School of Christ as the institution of higher learning, because I am totally disqualified in human measurement. So when something good comes, somebody can say, praise God, right? Whereas before, if it were the former situation, somebody would say, praise David, or praise the educational system, but now they can only say, praise God. And so everybody can look and say, well then, the only thing we need is that relationship with the Lord. And so that is why God made the Bible not the easiest thing to understand. And that is why the people who have all these letters and all this training, they end up with all kinds of foolishness. Honestly, they do. And sometimes, I guess sometimes I get into foolishness as well. But I think I think depending on the Lord, I'm in a safer place. We are in a safer place. And depending on the Lord and knowing ourselves to be nothing, the chances of going astray are far less. So this is why God made his word. He made it impossible for man to understand. So that those who want to understand have to come to God. So now you know why these who are wise in the ways of the world and educated and learned and have all the tools of exegesis and hermeneutics, now you know why they end up in all kinds of confusion and they can't agree with one another. As Jesus said, the things that are hidden from the wise and prudent, God has revealed them to babes and sucklings. The bottom line is the ways of God need God. The ways of God need God. And that is all that they need. So, anyway, trying to go to the book of Revelation, chapter 20 now, and looking at the question of, are we to take this literally or figuratively? What is symbolic and what is literal? A passage like this is not so hard because there are things here that tell you right away. You'd have to be kind of a simpleton to think that this is literal. First of all, an angel comes down from heaven, and what does he have? He has a key. Okay, if you take this literal, here comes an angel with a key in his hand. It's the key of the bottomless pit. Okay, the bottomless pit is literally the abyss. It means that I suppose it means basically the same thing. It's the deep, the abyss. Bottomless pit probably gives us a better understanding. And he not only has a key, but he has a great chain in his hand. So right away, if you are a person who is sensitive to the way the Bible is written, you are thinking this is 99% likely to be figurative, because you understand that keys and chains have to do with the physical world, and what we are looking at is something happening in the spiritual realm. I don't believe in the spiritual realm God uses keys and chains literally, because angels can walk through walls and keys can't hold them in prisons, right? So what we are looking at is a representation. It's a part of that coded language that we are talking about. It's a symbol. So, but the symbol means that somebody is going to get chained. In some way, somebody is going to be chained. And God explains this to us by showing us a key and a chain. So we have to understand that somebody is going to be, let me say, restrained instead of chained. Somebody is going to be restrained. So we see a key and a chain to help us to understand there's a restraint. And who is to be restrained? Verse 2 says, he lays hold on the dragon, that old serpent. Now, again, clearly it's symbolic, because who does he grab? He doesn't grab Lucifer. He grabs a dragon. So the very image that John is seeing tells you that this is symbolic. So you know that the dragon is Satan, because we are told what John sees is a dragon. And what John sees is an angel and a key and a chain. And then the angel comes and grabs the dragon. So this is not something that literally happens. I don't believe an angel comes from heaven and physically takes hold of Satan. In the spiritual world, it's not like that. Those are physical things, but because we are physical, and because that is what we know, God is giving us physical images to help us to understand things that are happening on a spiritual level. The whole point behind it is that in the spiritual world, Satan is to be restrained. That's the point. How do you restrain somebody in the spiritual world? Well, here's one way. Look here. there is a legion of demons inside of a man. Well, one book says there were two men, another one says there was a man, but it might have been just two different perspectives of the same thing. But anyway, the demons say, please do not cast us into the pit. Don't send us back into the pit, into the deep. Did Jesus have a key in his hand? Did Jesus have a chain? I mean, he had none of these things, and yet the demons were afraid that they were going to be sent into the deep. And then they asked Jesus, please allow us to go into the pigs. And he said, go. And when he said go, they could go nowhere else. They could not go into somebody else. They could not go into the tree. They had to go into the pigs because that's where he told them to go. In other words, the point I'm making is that in the spiritual realm, you don't need a chain and you don't need a key. But that legion of devils that was in that man, or was in those two men, they were chained by the word of Christ. They were chained by the word of Christ, and they could not break out of that chain. It was not a physical chain, it was a spiritual chain that bound them and channeled them into the pigs. So when I ask the question, how do you bind something in the spiritual world? The answer is clearly not with a physical chain or with a physical key, but those are symbols just to help us to understand what is going on. It means that in God's working, Satan is to be restrained in such a way that he cannot deceive the nations for 1,000 years. It says he was cast into the bottomless pit, and this is what we're going to take a look at in a little bit more depth today. This bottomless pit, we'll come to this. And set a seal upon him. And if you look at that, what did John see? John probably saw the angel, the same angel who had the chain. He had a seal in his hand. He put it on the stamp, and then he stamped. He stamped the door of the bottomless pit or whatever, so that Satan cannot be released until 1,000 years. And then he's going to be released for a little while. So everything that you are seeing, you can draw a picture of it. As a matter of fact, in the past, I drew pictures of all of this. But you can draw pictures of it. That means if you can draw a picture, it's something you can see and something you can visualize in the physical realm. Because that is what John saw. John saw something in a physical depiction. But now, because we understand the way of revelation, what we have to do is figure out, how could Satan be restrained so that he's not able to deceive people? How is Satan restrained without being literally taken and locked by an angel? And the answer is that it is the word of God that binds the devil. Okay, now when it says Satan is restrained, he's shut up, there are two ways that this shutting up takes place. First of all, way number one is that Satan is restrained by the word of God from leaving planet Earth. He cannot leave the planet. What we know is that Satan used to travel between earth and heaven, wherever heaven is. But he used to travel back and forth. He's there in the book of Job. He's there all over the place. He's back and forth between earth and heaven. But we know that in Revelation chapter 12 and verse 10, it says that the dragon was cast down and his place was found no more in heaven. He was not permitted to go back to heaven. So he's no longer able to go to heaven. But I suppose it's possible that he might have been able to go to other places in the solar system. Okay, maybe. I don't know. That is speculation. But here now, it says that he's bound for 1,000 years. He is confined and cannot tempt anybody for 1,000 years. So he's bound by the word of God. He cannot leave the planet. But there's another way in which he can be bound. Way number two. And I believe way number two is the way we are looking at. Number two, he's bound. In what sense is he bound? He has nobody to tempt. Where are the people? Where are the people? Well, first of all, when Jesus came, his people were caught up to meet him in the air, and they have gone to be with him for 1,000 years. They are no longer on planet Earth. Secondly, what about all the people that serve Satan? Well, they were either a part of the beast system or the false prophet system. All of them have been killed by the brightness of the coming of Jesus. Everybody is dead. The only persons alive are Satan and his angels. They have nobody to tempt, nobody to harass. They are not permitted to go anywhere else. So Satan is bound. He's limited. He's restrained. And so God depicts this by showing you an angel and a key and a chain. And he talks about the bottomless pit. But I think you all can get the point that I'm making, which is that there is no key and there's no chain and there's no literal bottomless pit. These are the words of the code. So I will pause one moment just to make sure that I'm being understood. Is there anybody who does not understand clearly what I'm saying? Good. Okay. Brother Ray, go ahead.
I just got a question because I know you're going to put this online and somebody may be thinking about it. Why is there a need? I know it's about to tie a chain on Satan and put him in the bottomless pit so that he doesn't tempt no one. When the reality is that when we go up to heaven for 1,000 years, there won't be no one here to be tempted.
Okay. So I'm glad you asked the question because it demonstrates that I'm going on and maybe I'm not being so well understood. So thank you for the question, Brother Ray. So the best way I can explain it, I'm going to try to think of a little story and I'm going to tell the story. And you probably can explain what the story means. Now I'm going to use the illustration I use all the time. There was a turtle one day walking along a road, and a rabbit came up and saw him going along and began to mock him because he was walking so slow, and boasting about how fast he could go, and to show off to his friends, he challenged the turtle to a race. So they came up, they agreed on a date for the race, and they came to the starting point under a great big tree, and all their friends were gathered together to see this race. So they gave them a mark, set, go, and the rabbit was off like a rocket. After a while, he was so far ahead that he decided to take a rest, and he sat down under a tree to rest, and he fell fast asleep. And while he was sleeping, hours later, or a long time afterwards, the turtle came along, passed him, and continued to get to the finish point, and he won the race. When the rabbit finally arrived, he was so ashamed, he went and hid in a corner and wouldn't show his face. Now, I know it's simplistic and childlike, but I told a little child's story. So I want to ask the question, Brother Ray, and I would like you to answer. I told a long story. Tell me, what do you think I was saying?
I believe that the rabbit was careless, fell asleep, and a turtle passed by him and won the race. No?
All right. I appreciate you telling me what you heard. Does anybody else want to give it a try? What do you think I was saying?
It's a representative tale. It's not to be taken literally.
What do you think I was saying?
Slow and steady wins the race.
Always be vigilant.
Yeah,
Right.
the rabbit was too fast and furious. He was
And
not vigilant.
All right. I
Race,
like.
Don't show off. Don't show off.
No, the race
All
is
right.
not for the swift, but for those who endure.
Right. Somebody said, "Slow and steady wins the race." 6 words. Brother Bernard says the race is not for the swift, but for those who endure. And Brother Cliff said, or somebody said, "Don't show off." Those are the answers that I was really looking for. Now, if you notice in those answers, there's no mention of a rabbit. There's no mention of a race. There's no mention of a turtle. I told a story about a rabbit and a turtle and a race. But what I am saying has nothing to do with a rabbit or a turtle or a race. You hear the story, but the point is you get the lesson, not the story. Now, the reason why I did this, I realized that maybe it's not just Brother Ray that I might be confusing. Maybe I'm confusing other people. So I told the story to kind of break it down so to see if I could make my point a little more simple and graphic. The story that God tells in Revelation 7, in Revelation 20, it has nothing to do with an angel coming down from heaven, nothing to do with a bottomless pit, nothing to do with a chain or a key. Those are just a picture that is given to us to teach us something. And what we are being taught is that Satan has nobody to tempt. He's confined with nobody to tempt. That's the whole lesson. Now, why is there nobody to tempt? As Brother Ray says, the righteous are in heaven and the wicked are dead. But God tells a story. And then you have to look at the story now and think, what is the point? And just like the story of the rabbit and the turtle, the point is not the rabbit or the turtle or the race. The point is the lesson behind the whole thing. In the same way, the story is not about a bottomless pit or a key or a chain. The real lesson is that Satan has nobody to harass. For 1,000 years, all he can do is think about his misdeeds. That's the whole point of that long story. So, is there still any confusion in anybody's mind? All right, thank you. Let's go on.
I think when Carlos asked and he left a question mark in the chat box there.
Right, brother Juan Carlos. Just like Jesus and the parables he spoke. Yeah, it was a lesson behind the parable. Right, not the parable itself. The parable itself is just a story. And a lot of time people get caught up in the story when the story is not the point at all. But all right, yes, so the question, thanks for the question, Brother Ray, because at least it helped to maybe simplify it a little bit. So the whole point of these 3 verses is to tell us that Satan is restrained and confined, and for 1,000 years all he can do is think about his misdeeds. How he came to that place is not the point, because it says he's chained, but we can look in the background and see that it was because nobody's there to be tempted. They're all gone, or either dead or in heaven. Now the thing I want to focus on a little bit is the bottomless pit. What does that symbol mean? As I said, there's no bottomless pit. That's a part of the code. But since the phrase the bottomless pit comes up several places, let me focus on that a little bit and see if we can break down the meaning of it a little bit more. Now it's in the book of Revelation. It's in about 4 places. But I'm going to look at the 4 places and then I will explain what I think it means. In Revelation 9 and verse 1, look at what it says. It's talking about the trumpets. It says, the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. There you have another reference to the bottomless pit and to a key. In this case, the key opens the bottomless pit. It says that this star opens the bottomless pit. And this is where the locusts come out of the bottomless pit. In verse 11 it says, these locusts had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon. But in the Greek tongue he hath his name Apollyon, and Apollyon means the destroyer. So the king of this bottomless pit is said to be Apollyon or Abaddon, and he's the destroyer. So I suppose it's logical to conclude that this Abaddon, this king of the bottomless pit, is Satan, which is interesting because in Revelation 20 it says he's bound in the bottomless pit. All right, I want to look at the references and then let us see what we can gather from the phrase. In Revelation 11, in verse 7, look what it says, talking about the 2 witnesses. When they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them and shall overcome them and kill them. So what we see so far is that at the end, Satan is bound in the bottomless pit. During the time of the trumpets, after the close of probation, the bottomless pit is open, and there is a star that falls from heaven that opens this pit, and there is an angel who has charge over the bottomless pit, and his name is Abaddon or Apollyon. He's Satan. Here in Revelation 11, you see where the beast comes out of the bottomless pit, and it happens when the two witnesses finish their testimony. At this point, you can be forgiven if you think the bottomless pit is a real literal place. In Revelation 17 and verse 8, again it mentions the beast that you saw was and is not and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. So, if you are just reading and you're not using the code, if you don't understand the code, you will say, all right, the bottomless pit is clearly a place where demons are, because the locusts come out of the bottomless pit, and the angel of the bottomless pit is Satan, and the beast comes out of the bottomless pit at a certain point in time, and the dragon, Satan, is locked up in the bottomless pit at the end of time. So, superficially, it looks like the bottomless pit is a certain place, a certain location. But again, I believe this is one of those places where, again, the book is designed to confuse. There's something else that you can look at when you look at this bottomless pit. Now, when we talk about the bottomless pit, as a matter of fact, not just the bottomless pit, but when you come to the book of Revelation, one of the things you will know is that when it talks about places, 90% of the time it's not talking about a place. For example, when it says that Babylon, when it refers to Babylon, some people believe it's speaking about a place, granted, but I don't believe it's speaking about a place. It's speaking about a condition of a certain entity. Place names are used. It says that the angel pours out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the river Euphrates is dried up. You hear people talk about Euphrates drying up. If you go on YouTube right now, you'll see videos about Euphrates drying up, and people will say that this is the prophecy being fulfilled. Absolute nonsense. First of all, we are not yet in the time of the plagues. But secondly, Euphrates in Revelation is not a river. It's not a river. Euphrates in the Old Testament was a place. But Euphrates in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, is not a place. It's not a river. Euphrates refers to the volume of people who support Babylon. And you know, because Revelation itself tells you the waters which you saw, the waters represent peoples and nations and multitudes and kings. That's Revelation 17 and verse 15. So water looks like a place, but it's not a place. It's represents people. So this is why I say, when you see a place in Revelation, don't think it means a place. 90% of the time, maybe more, it refers to a spiritual condition, not a place. And I'll explain why that is. That it's easy to understand why God does this. Okay, if God says Mount Zion, the 144,000 are standing on Mount Zion. All right, and you want to be standing on Mount Zion. You know the only way you're going to get there? You better find a rocket or something and find yourself up in heaven. Or if Mount Zion is down in Palestine, you better find yourself there. You have to go to a physical location to be on Mount Zion. But Revelation is not like that. It's not talking about a physical place. It's talking about a spiritual state. So this is true over and over in the book of Revelation. So when it talks about the bottomless pit, first of all, the first thing I say is that, is there such a place as a bottomless pit? Does it exist? I hear people talk about finding some hole in different parts of the world. When I was a boy, when I was a teenager, I went out with my friends to shoot birds, someplace in the bush in a place when I used to live in Trelawney. And we went through the bush and we were eating. There was a lot of fruit in the bush. We found nesberries and sweet sops. We're trying to shoot birds, and we came up on a place where we saw a hole in the ground. It was like about 2 feet wide in circumference, and it was perfectly round. And one of my friends dropped a stone in the hole, a rock. It just went down. We couldn't see anything, and he dropped a rock. And when he dropped the rock, we heard, and then silence for a long time, and then we heard, bang, and then silence again. And after a long time, you heard, bang, and after a long time, and then you heard a bang further down. And look here, we moved from that place fast because I don't know what kind of hole that was and how deep it was. When the stone made the first drop, it took several seconds before we heard anything. It hit something that sounded like metal. Then it took another long drop, then another sound. I don't know what that was, and I don't know how that hole got there. But when you think of a bottomless pit, people will talk about places like that. But I mean, in fact, there is no such place as a bottomless pit, because you know that at some point you have to reach the other side of the world. You have to find some kind of bottom. Okay, so it's not a place. But if you follow the pattern of Revelation, places are used to describe conditions. If you tell me that Satan is put in a bottomless pit, I mean, it doesn't matter to me if he's put on top of Mount Everest, or he's put in the depths of the Grand Canyon, or he's buried in the depths of the sea. It doesn't make any difference, right? When God says he's put in a bottomless pit, God is trying to tell us something about a spiritual condition. So when we go back and look at those different places in the Bible where it talks about a bottomless pit, there's a common thread, a common thing that goes with all of them. Now, the first time I began to study Revelation, I read the book by Uriah Smith, Daniel and the Revelation. And I will tell anybody that it was a great help to me. It was a blessing because it gave me a foundation. I mean, the problem is that there are so many things in it today that I don't agree with anymore. But it gave me a foundation. It helped me to begin to understand the basics of how to go about studying prophecy. But anyway, in that book, it says that the bottomless pit represents a desert area of the world. They say that it was said that it represents a place where there are not many people, and it talked about, you know, the deserts of Africa, the deserts of Arabia, that at one point that was described as a bottomless pit. And it says that when Satan is confined to this earth, it is called a bottomless pit because at that point there's nobody living here, so it is empty. So it's called a bottomless pit. The book describes the bottomless pit as a physical place. A physical place. And as I said, I don't agree with this. I don't see this. And when I look at the different places, look here, it says that are you hearing me? Okay. Okay. All right. So it says that there's a place where the beast comes from. The beast comes from the bottomless pit. That is not talking about a place on earth. That would suggest that there's a deserted place on earth, and then the beast comes from that deserted place. No. Anyway, it's clear to me that the bottomless pit is not a place, it's a condition. And when you look at all the places where it talks about the bottomless pit, the one thing I see in common, and I'll explain what I see in common. First of all, it talks about, let me go to one that is easier to understand. Revelation 11 and verse 7. It talks about the two witnesses. It says, and when they shall have finished their testimony. At what point in time are we when the two witnesses have finished their testimony? And if you have been following our studies in the prophecies, you know that when the two witnesses finish their testimony, then it is what we call the end of probation. It's the end of grace. The world comes to a point where nobody is to be saved beyond this point. And at this point, it says they encounter the beast from the bottomless pit. So if we are talking about the bottomless pit being a condition instead of a place, when the two witnesses finish their testimony, the world arrives at a condition. And that condition is what is referred to as the bottomless pit. The world is now in the condition of the bottomless pit. Can you touch the second button on the left? No, the other one. Yeah. Hot. Yeah. So the bottomless pit. Let me come straight and say what I think. I think the bottomless pit is simply a code that means a place where there's no hope. A condition, not a place, a condition where there's no hope. We're talking about spiritually a bottomless pit. When you fall into a bottomless pit, you have no hope. You will never get out. So if you are spiritually in a bottomless pit, it means that you are in a condition where spiritually you have no more hope. And the only time that we come to that place on this planet is when we have come to the end of probation, when the Spirit of God has departed from this world and there's no more opportunity for anybody to be saved. Spiritually, the world has become a bottomless pit. And so when it says that the star opens the bottomless pit, it means that this star, let us assume it is Satan, or it's a figurative representation. When the bottomless pit is open, it means that the earth has come to the close of probation. Nobody else can be saved. And at this point, the bottomless pit is open. A condition of utter godlessness and hopelessness springs upon this planet. You think the California wildfires are bad? You think the pandemic was bad? You think evil men and conspiracies are bad? Wait until the bottomless pit is open, and we will see what Satan and godless men are capable of. So when the bottomless pit is open, that's why it says these locusts come upon the earth. So we are talking about a condition. Now at this point, this is when the beast re-emerges. The beast comes back into prominence in his true identity as king number 8, for those who are following Revelation 17. So when it says that Satan is put in the bottomless pit, it means that Satan is confined in a condition on a hopeless planet where there's no light, no God, nothing that is bright. There's nothing here but darkness. He's confined to a condition where for 1,000 years nothing pleasant will cross his pathway. Because even though he's Satan, even though he's the devil, there is still grace extended to this planet. There's still good in this planet, a lot of it. God's people are still here. The Spirit of God is still present. When the Spirit of God has gone, when God's people leave this planet, when probation is ended, the Spirit of God is withdrawn from this planet. It becomes a bottomless pit, a place of utter hopelessness. And when the wicked die, Satan is confined here for 1,000 years. He is bound in this bottomless pit condition. All right, so let me pause again and ask, is there any question concerning that? All right, praise the Lord. All right, let's go back to Revelation chapter 20, and let's move on the verses. Let's see if we can get to verse 6. John says, "And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and the judgment was given unto them." All right. Now, who is he talking about? Let me read to the end of that. Let me read down to the end of that verse. "And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years." But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. I know we have gone through this a few times, but each time we come upon it, I feel like I need to go back and explain it detail by detail, because I know sometimes the main points are forgotten or overlooked or not properly understood. Now, John saw thrones, and they, that is, he saw somebody sitting upon these thrones, and it says judgment was given unto to them. Who are we talking about? Well, it goes on to explain it was the souls of those who were beheaded, those who had not received the mark, who had not worshipped the beast. They are the ones who lived and they reigned with Christ 1,000 years. Now, it only mentions a certain set of people. It mentions those who have passed through the mark of the beast crisis and who didn't worship the beast. So you might be thinking, what about the rest of humanity? This seems to suggest that only a certain group of people are in heaven going through this experience. What about the rest? But here's what I will say. Please remember, the book of Revelation is focusing on the last crisis. It's focusing on the time of the end. Remember that. Everybody here should know that the book of Revelation is about the judgment. We have studied this extensively. It's about the last judgment, the judgment of the two kingdoms. So, in the book of Revelation, we are not looking at the people who lived in former ages. Even in Revelation 7, where it talks about the great multitude, I've tried to show that it is not focusing on those who lived in all ages. The book of Revelation is telling the story of those who live in the end times. That's why it is our book and our story. So it's focused on these people. It does not mean that the rest of humanity is not going to be in heaven, or the rest of humanity is not enjoying these benefits. That is a given. But why are the last day people specifically pointed out? You know why? Because they died many of them died as criminals. They were treated like criminals. They were hounded from place to place. They were told that they could not live in this planet. So they are the ones who have vindicated the kingdom of Christ. They are the ones who are highlighted and mentioned above the others, because Revelation is their story. Okay, so looking at Revelation in context, that's one of the things that we need to understand most of all. Okay, now it says, they sat upon thrones, and judgment was given unto them. Let me see if I can find any version of the Bible that tells you something different. The NASB says judgment was given to them. The NIV says they were given authority to judge. All right. The World English Bible says judgment was given to them. You can tell, as you look at these translations, you can tell that the proper translation is probably judgment was given to them, because you have several of these versions that say it that way. The NIV is taking liberties. It says they had been given authority to judge. But the whole point of it is that they are involved in some kind of judgment. Now, when you talk about judgment, there are two things I want us to consider. And the reason why I'm putting these two things before you is because these represent the two ideas out there in Christendom. the vast majority of the Christian world, they believe that during this time, the people who are mentioned here, which is the 144,000 basically, they will be made into judges to judge people, and that they will be judging people. They believe that people will still be alive on earth, and that these people who are taken out of the world, they believe it will be just a special class. They will be up in heaven judging people, and when they say judging people, they will be carrying out the function of judges and governors and administrators. And so let us say we are those people. We are in heaven, and we sit on thrones, and we are judging the rest of people down here. And if they do wrong, we are passing judgment on them. And if they have any contentions, we are passing judgment and making decisions. That's how they understand it. Now, the other concept of judgment that I'm going to put before you is the concept that we have seen in the book of Revelation so far. When it talks about judgment in Revelation, we go first of all to Revelation chapter 4, where you see that scene that takes place, the judgment, and God is sitting on the throne, and Jesus takes the book out of his hand, and he starts to open the book. And we pointed out that this is the judgment of the kingdom. It corresponds to Daniel 7, where the judgment was set and the books were opened. This is not a judgment where people are sitting like judges and governing other people. It's not that kind of judgment. It's a judgment where people are examining information, and based on the information, they are concluding certain things. In other words, you're not administrating over other people. You're actually examining evidence and forming conclusions in your mind about events and things that happened already or that are even happening now. But you're not sitting in judgment where you are being a governor or an administrator over people. So this is my understanding based on what we see in the book of Revelation. It's not the kind of judgment where you are an administrator and a governor and you are passing sentences. No, it's the kind of judgment where you are examining books. Well, let me say records, right? Because I don't think they are using books in that system. But anyway, so the point is why, and who are they judging? Here's the thing that makes perfect sense. When we were studying the book of Daniel, you saw that the whole thing about the way God operates is that before he makes any major move, there is judgment. The heavenly tribunal, the watchers and the holy ones, they go through and they examine, so that when God makes a move, everybody agrees. Everybody agrees because everybody sees the evidence. So even the judgment of the kingdom, the heavenly beings are examining the kingdom. Jesus is opening the book of the seven seals, and they are looking at the evidence, and then they form a judgment, right? The kingdoms of this world become the kingdoms of our God and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever. Judgment is finished of the kingdom. So the saints are taken to heaven, and we start the judgment process again. Why? It makes perfect sense, because the only people who don't know what is going on are the saints. You and I get to heaven and we don't know. We were not there for the judgment. We were not there when this was going on in heaven. God knows. He always knew. Jesus always knew. But the angels know, because they have sat in the judgment and looked at the evidence. They have seen the whole history that we see in the book of Revelation. So they have the data before them. The only people who don't have the data is you and me when we get to heaven. I don't know so much about planet Earth and what was going on. I don't know so much about so many people that I expect to see in the kingdom and they are not there. I don't know so much about what is going on in the background. Those who are in the kingdom for those 1,000 years, judgment is given to them in that they are granted the privilege of having the same information as those who are in heaven. They're having their questions answered. And that's why it makes sense that God takes them to heaven for 1,000 years. Right? There's nobody who's going to make it into the new earth. Nobody is going to make it into the new earth who has those questions still in your mind. everything is going to be clear and transparent before everybody. And it's not because God is going to take you and put you in a room and says, let me teach you. No, it's because we are going to see for ourselves. It's because God allows us to open up all the data, the information. What heaven has seen, we will see. And we will have 1,000 years in which to do it. So that's the kind of judgment I believe that they are involved in. Yes, Brother Kip, go ahead.
So, where do they get the idea that like, they're gonna reign with Christ on earth for 1,000 years? Is that in verse 8 there? Is that where they're getting that other people believe that they're gonna reign on earth instead of reigning in heaven?
Brother Kip, it's a very long and convoluted journey to get to that place. And I can tell you what they believe, but to tell you why they believe it, it's going to take a complete afternoon to do it. So I won't even bother try to touch it. But let me tell you what they believe, okay? They believe that we are going to be okay. This is a sequence. Now, please, everybody, once once I tell you this, put it on the wrong side of your brain, not the right side. They say when you learn something that you don't want to remember, you are training yourself to forget. So I want you to remember, but make sure that you understand what I'm telling you is what I don't believe, what I believe to be false. Okay? So they believe that any day now we are going to be caught away. When I say we, the church, the Christian church is going to be caught away any day now. This is what they call the rapture or the secret rapture. We are going to be in heaven for 7 years. After we are caught away, down here on earth, somebody is going to make a covenant with the Jews. That is the people down there in Palestine. God will be finished with the Gentiles. That is the people of the world. We are the people of the world who got away. The rest of the world, God is finished with them. Now he's going to go back to the Jews. So the Jews are going to go back to being his special people. And so he's going to go back to the Jews. And somebody is going to make a special covenant with them, which is, I think, the people are looking at Trump and saying Trump might do it and all of that. Let me not confuse anybody. But anyway, somebody will make this covenant with the Jews. It will be the Antichrist. The Antichrist will arrive right on time, and he will make a covenant with the Jews for 3.5 years. So the Jews will rebuild the temple, and they will set up back the temple worship. And then they say after 3.5 years now, the Antichrist will break his covenant with the Jews. That time, all of us are in heaven at this point. What is going on down here. The Antichrist will break his covenant with the Jews, and he will start persecuting the Jews. They will be persecuted for 3.5 years, great persecution, and at that time, some believe Revelation will be fulfilled, some parts of Revelation. At the end of 7 years, Jesus will come again, and he will destroy the enemies of the Jews in the battle of Armageddon. And then he will come down here on earth and set up his kingdom. Along with all of us who went away, we were in heaven for 7 years. And now we come back to earth. And when we come back to earth, those who are fighting against the Jews will be destroyed. And then we who were taken up to heaven now, we are going to be made governors and judges. And so the people who remain on earth now, we are going to rule over them. And there'll be 1,000 years now that we are ruling over these people. Now remember, at this time, sin is not yet finished. Sin is still going on. And anybody who does any wrong thing, they'll be immediately punished. They believe that at this time Jesus will rule with a rod of iron. He will go back to the Old Testament way of ruling. So if you make a mistake, you're gone. And we will be helping in that kind of government. We will be judging the world. And they even believe that some of them that we are going to go back to keeping things like the feast days and the old system. It's very, very confused. And after that 1,000 years now, Satan is let out of his prison. They believe. I forgot to put in this part. When Jesus comes back after the 7 years, Satan is going to be chained up, right? Put somewhere and chained up in some location. So for 1,000 years, Satan won't be around. And during those 1,000 years, we are going to be teaching the people how to live righteously. And we're going to be teaching them how to serve the Lord. And for 1,000 years, there's going to be peace. And people are going to beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. And if anybody sins, they are going to be cut off immediately. You'll still have people dying and so on and so forth, but there's going to be 1,000 years of peace. At the end of the 1,000 years, guess what God does? God releases Satan upon these people who have been living in peace for 1,000 years. He releases Satan and he lets him out on these people. And guess what happens? After the people have been learning righteousness for 1,000 years, masses of them, the vast majority, like the sands of the sea, they go back to serving Satan. And you have to wonder what was the point of it all. Anyway, they go back to serving Satan and they go back and they surround the camp of the saints, and fire comes down from God out of heaven and destroys them. They are thrown into the lake of fire. And after that, now, the Lord makes a new earth where we will live forever. So that's what they believe, Brother Kip. And you will understand why it will take a lot of time to really explain how anybody comes to this conclusion.
Yeah, I never knew. I never understood. I never really heard anything about how all that took place, and I could never understand why they would think that to begin with. That's crazy. All right.
Right. I agree with you about being crazy. That's one of the things that I ask people when I hear them with this. I say, what is the point? Jesus died for us. We went through all this trouble. Jesus comes again and he goes back to the Jews. And then not only that, but he goes back to 1,000 years of a rule of iron. And after 1,000 years of peace, he releases Satan again. After 6,000 years, he lets him go on these people again. And what is the point? You know, it's like a divine being just playing games with people. The thing that you believe not only has to be biblical, but it should be reasonable. God is reasonable, and if it's not reasonable, you can almost tell just from that basis alone that it is not true. All right. So another day, Brother Kip, we might take the time. You all have to have your armor on if we're going to look at it and to consider how do they come to this conclusion. Put on your armor, and we will take the time and look at how they come to this conclusion, because I say it's very convoluted and so on, but we will do it. All right, so I'll just look
Sister
at the
Esther
next.
has a question.
Say that again, Brother Kip.
Sister Esther has a question. Has her
Oh,
hand up.
my apologies. Go ahead, Sister Esther.
Um, yes, my question, I think I about lost it. Um,
Sorry.
yeah, it'll probably come back to me.
All right, Sister Esther. I'm not really seeing the hand, so make a sound if it comes back to you, okay? Because I'm actually looking at the Bible screen, so I'm not seeing what's going on the GoToMeeting screen.
I remember it.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask how this, where is the Feast of Tabernacles and at what time is that? Is that not about this time that we're talking about?
The Feast of Tabernacles is 1,000 years.
That's what I thought. Ellen White, I think, said it was 7 days we were getting to heaven in the journey.
I something like that, I suppose. But the conditions of the Feast of Tabernacles are, in my opinion, very clear that it's talking about the time we're in heaven, because the Feast of Tabernacles was after the harvest has been gathered in. So, it's after Jesus comes again. But then they are told to leave their homes, That's a critical thing, because this world is our home. The world was made to be inhabited, and here is where we will live forever. But they were to leave their homes for a time. Actually, in the type, it was it was 7 days. But they were to leave their homes, and they were to go out, and they were to build little booths on top of their on the top of their homes, and out in the woods. They were to build temporary dwellings, and they were to rejoice before the Lord. They were to wave palm branches and rejoice before the Lord for that week, and that was the Feast of Tabernacles. So if you translate that into a new covenant understanding, after the harvest, after Jesus gathers his people, where do they go? They leave their homes, and the 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 bigger picture is that we leave our home, which is planet Earth. And you go to Revelation, you see the 144,000 before the throne, and they are waving palm branches. So what God is telling us is that we leave this earth and we go to a temporary place before we actually come back to our home. And in that place, we are going to be rejoicing and praising God. All right, so let me just look at the next. Yes, somebody?
Yeah, just a quick question.
Sure, go ahead.
So with the Feast of the Tabernacle, will it go on for 1,000 years, or how will that relate to the judgment that will be given to the saints?
Well, we
Or
will be
is
in
it?
heaven for 1,000 years. That 1,000 years is like it serves a manifold purpose. And let me tell you what I mean. For example, you know that the 1,000 years is corresponding to the 7 day Sabbath. The 7 day Sabbath is a time of rest and fellowship with God. So it's not just the judgment. It's not just that we are in heaven in order to participate in the judgment. We are in heaven to relax and enjoy life and live with the Lord and see his face and enjoy heaven and maybe visit other parts in the universe. It's a time of rest for God's people. After 6,000 years, we come to the great Sabbath, when fellowship with God is the center. Whatever he's doing, wherever he wants us to go, we are in it for that 1,000 years. But a part of that process is also bringing our minds to that place of perfect understanding, where we are privileged to see in the judgment exactly everything. So it's a manifold experience. It's not just that we go to judge, it's everything involved as well in fellowship.
Thank you.
All right.
Brother David,
Yes, Brother Tony.
this question just came to me. Is that 1,000 years symbolic?
Well, it's we are tempted to ask that question, and my answer would be I lean to the belief that it is not symbolic, and the reason why is because the pattern of the 7 day week matches exactly with the pattern of the 6,000 years plus 1,000. The way they match together, and God's own statement that 1,000 years is like a day in the eyes of the Lord is like 1,000 years. So when you put all of these together, you see that God took 6 days to make the earth, and on the seventh day was a Sabbath of rest. When you compare that to what has been going on, you see God taking 6,000 years to recreate the relationship with himself and to restore humanity. And then after that, we have 1,000 years of fellowship with the Lord. So God has replaced one day with 1,000 years. So because of this, I am inclined to believe that the 1,000 years is a literal time.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Welcome, Brother Tony. All right, the last thing I will look at is just verses 5 and 6. And I just want to look at it because it's a little mix up here because of the way the King James writers actually, well, not the King James writers. The people who put in the somebody's unmuted. Please mute. Please mute. Let me see. Heather, Sister Heather.
Oh,
Heather,
sorry. Hold on.
all right.
Here.
Let me help you. All right. It's because of the way, you know what I would want to do? Let me copy the verses. You see, I'm going to copy the verses and I'm going to put them in a Word document, and I want you to look at the way you could translate this. All right, let me know if you are seeing. Do you see Microsoft Word on the screen? Is that what you see?
Yes.
All right, good. So let me zoom this in and make it bigger, big enough so we can see it. All right. Okay, so this is verse 5 and verse 6. Now you know that the all right, verse 5 and verse 6. Now you know that the verses were not put in by the inspired writers. There are no verses in the original writings. And sometimes that makes it more difficult and sometimes that makes it easier. This is how the King James Version put it. And it was put this way because they misunderstood what was being said. This part of the verse, you see the part I've highlighted, this is the first resurrection. They should actually have put it right here. Now let's read it and see if it makes sense. It says, but the rest of the dead live not again until the 1,000 years were finished. Verse 6, this is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. Now, if you leave this up here, the way they put it in the verses, it looks like it is saying that those who come to life after the 1,000 years, this is the first resurrection. And that's not true. After the 1,000 years, the people who come back to life, that's not the first resurrection. The first resurrection is before the 1,000 years. That's when the first resurrection is. The resurrection at the end of the 1,000 years is the resurrection of the wicked. Those are the ones who come back to face the execution of judgment. But the King James Version translators put it this way. But the rest of the dead live not until the 1,000 years are finished. This is the first resurrection. They made a mistake. Well, I keep saying the translators. It's not the translators. It's the people who put in the verses. So I take the liberty. It's not inspired. I take out this part and I put it down at verse 6, and now it makes perfect sense. The rest of the dead did not live until the 1,000 years were finished. Then it goes on now to talk about the first resurrection. This is like a subtitle. This is the first resurrection. Now we're going to talk about the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that has part in the first resurrection. Now we are discussing the first resurrection. On the people who experience this, the second death has no power. They shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall rule with him for 1,000 years. So that's just the point I wanted to make about these two verses, verses 5 and 6. And if you don't understand what I just said, then somebody can unmute and tell me if you don't understand. If you do understand, I give God thanks, because that brings us to the end of our session for this evening. All right. Now I'm just going to say something quickly before I have the closing prayer and then take some questions. But I see some discussion about whether or not we should look at a teaching that is not true. You know, like for example, the teaching of the rapture. But I know there is a thought, if it's false, why should we look at it? But I'm going to justify why I do it and why I think it might be helpful. The thing is, long ago, I developed this attitude where I would not criticize something unless I understood it. I think the Bible says the one who answers a matter before he hears it, he's a fool. So a lot of what I learned is because I had discussions with people like Jehovah's Witnesses and Pentecostals and people like this, even Mormons. I studied with them so I could understand what they were saying, because when I remember the Mormons came and they were coming to my home for two months. They were two nice young guys and they were so nice. I was nice to them too. And they wanted me so badly to become a Mormon, and they wanted me to study their book. And I said, why should I read this? I said, I know that it's nonsense. They said, Brother David, they were very nice. Two little guys. I felt almost like a father to them. They said, we think if you read the book, you will find that it is true. I said, how will I know if it is true? They said, you will feel a warm feeling in your bosom. I said, I don't trust feelings. I don't trust warm feelings. They said, Brother David, just read it and tell us, and the Lord will tell you whether it is true. You know what I did? I went to the Lord and I said, Lord, should I start looking at this book? And I started looking at it, and everything I saw was making me cringe. And I said, Lord, what will I tell these guys? They're so nice. Back in those days, I used to paint pictures, and they even paid me to do a picture for them. So we got on very nicely. There are two young American boys who came to Jamaica working as Mormon missionaries. So they came to my house. So anyway, I asked the Lord, what shall I tell these guys? You know what the Lord said? The Lord said, tell them the truth. Okay? So when they came the next time, as nicely as I could, I said, guys, I did what you asked. I asked the Lord to tell me whether it is true or false. And the Lord said I should tell you the truth. And I told him the truth. I said, I believe it is from the devil. I tried to do it as kindly as possible. But they told me to pray. They told me to ask the Lord. And I did. And the Lord says, tell them the truth about what you think. And I told him, I think it is from the devil. But you know how I knew? Because I looked at it. The doctrine of the rapture. I can pull it to pieces. And I can explain to people why this cannot be true. I can explain to people who believe it why it cannot be true. And you know why? Because I studied it thoroughly. So I know what I believe. I know why I believe what I believe, because I've looked at other things. I look at the other side of it and the other side, and I can balance it and say, does this make sense? So I find that my own position is strengthened. Now, I agree that sometimes we don't have the time. And if you don't have the time, then don't, because time is precious. But if we do have the time to look at something that somebody else believes, I don't think it is safe to just, I think it's a bit of arrogance to say, I know everything already. I don't need to hear what you have to say. So that's my justification for thinking that sometimes if we take the time to look at something, even though it's not what we believe to be true, it still is not a waste of time, because it strengthens me in my own convictions when I'm able to do that. So that's my justification. All right. So anyway, I'm going to pray, and then we can take questions or comments afterwards.